Today's daf is Chulin daf Chof Tes. And we are 11 lines from the bottom of daf Chof Ches Amid Beis, Chatzi Echad V'oif V'chulo. Before we begin, I just want to wish a heartfelt mazel tov to the Steinberg and Muller families upon the chasana of Pini and Malki. Just want to give you a bracha. You should be zeicha to build a bayis ne'eman b'Yisrael and continue to give your parents and your entire families much Yiddish and nachas. So we're moving along in Perek HaShoichet, dealing with halachas related to Shchitas Chulin. The Mishnah had said that in the event that a shoichet shechts roiv of a simin, then the shchita is considered a shchita. So if it's an oif, roiv of one siman is a shchita. If it's a behema, roiv of two simanim is going to be considered a shchita. If, however, the shoichet would go and would shecht chatzi echad ba'oif or echad v'chatzi bebehema, shchita psula. In that instance, the shchita is going to be pasul. And again, the reason is because in order for the shchita of a siman to be considered a shchita, you need at the very least a roiv. And if you get it only halfway, then in and of itself is not going to be okay. Sounds pretty straightforward at first glance, stating that the first part of today's daf. Zok the Gemara Itmar, Rav said, Mechza al Mechza Karoif. In the event that the shoichet gets it 50% right, so he shechts half of the simin, it's as if he did roiv of the simin. Rav Kana said, Mechza al Mechza in a Karoif, that in the event that he did 50% of it, it's as if he didn't do roiv. Meaning, according to Rav, Mechza al Mechza is kosher. According to Rav Kahana, Mechza al Mechza is going to be possible. Zok the Rav Mechza al Mechza Karoif. Rav holds that if he gets 50% of it right, it's going to be okay. Because this is the way you understand what the Eibishter meant when he told Moshe Rabbeinu roiv. What he meant was not that you have to shecht roiv, but rather loy teshaya ruba. You can't leave over roiv. But if you do half, even though you didn't do roiv, that in itself is going to be okay. You know why? Because he didn't leave over roiv. Rav Kahana holds that if you only do half of it, it's not considered roiv. Because this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe. Shchait ruba. You actually have to shecht roiv. So machlokes Rav and Rav Kahana, at first glance, we'll see soon what the machlokes is at second glance, but at first glance, whether the shoichet actually has to shecht roiv, or if he does it mechza al mechza, that in and of itself is going to be okay. Rav said mechza al mechza is okay. Rav Kahana said mechza al mechza is not okay. Says the Gemara, simin, chatzi, ketina, gargeres, Pegima. This is a siman for 4 kashas that the Gemara is now going to ask on this machlokes Rav and Rav Kahana. Kasha number 1. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, the Mishnah that we began with, Chatzi echad ba'oif, echad b'chatzi b'behema shchita psula, that in the event that the shoichet shechted a half of one siman by an oif, or even 1.5 siman by behema, it's not going to be okay. If you're going to tell me mechza karoiv, that if you get it 50-50, it's considered roiv. Amai pasul. Why is it pasul? Ha'avad le roiv. He did roiv. So bishloima, if you literally have to get roiv, so if you only got half, you didn't get roiv. But if you're going to tell me even half is like roiv, so why in the Mishnah is it possible? So the Gemara says midrabanan. You have to say that really midairaisa mechza is good. The reason the Mishnah says it's not okay, it's a din derabanan tulma asi lemevet palga, because we're afraid that if we would say that palga is kosher, then you're living on the edge, you might not even get the palga. So sometimes, wink, wink, we make believe the boundary is a little closer than it really is, so that if you make a mistake, you're still going to be within bounds. So the Mishnah said that mechza al mechza is pasul. Really, it's kosher. It's just the rabbinic thing that we're saying it's pasul. And the reason rabbinically we're saying it's pasul is because if we're going to say it's kosher, so then you're going to think, oh, all I need to do it is mechza al mechza, and you're going to get it a little less than mechza al mechza. If I tell you mechza al mechza is already pasul, so then you're not looking out to make sure that it's not less than mechza al mechza, even making sure that it's not mechza al mechza, which gives you that little bit of a buffer. It's like this, we're more confident that you're going to end up getting it roiv good. Rav Katina said, Toshma, I'll ask you another kasha. So the siman of chatzi was from the Mishnah, chatzi echad ba'oif. The second word of the siman was ketina. That's because Rav Katina is the one that's talking. See, he said, Cholkul Lishnayim, and the halacha of Rav Katina was discussing kli cheres. So we know because we actually just learned this together in the daf a few days ago, that a kli cheres is unique in the world of Tumah v'Taira. One of the ways it's unique is that in the event that it becomes tummy, the only way it could become tar is if you destroy it. So it's not a kli shetef. You can't wash it. You can't be matayin in a mikvah. It actually needs to be destroyed. Now, the halach is that in the event that a person takes a kli cheres and he throws it on the ground and he breaks it, but roiv of the original keli is still intact. So it broke into pieces, but the main piece still has a roiv of the original keli. So the halach is the keli is still going to be tameh, because breaking a keli means you make it at least less than roiv. So says the Braisa, what would be chokul l'shnayim? In the event somebody had a kli cheres that was tameh, and he broke it into two, ve'hin shavin, and it's literally two equal parts. So this person nailed it. Hole in one. He broke it and it's exactly 50-50. So the halach is shneim teneim, they're both going to be tameh. You know why? The fishe efshel litzamtzem. Because it's impossible that it's exact. And as a result, one is probably a little bit bigger than the other. The one that's a little bit bigger is the roiv. Oh, roiv of the keli is still intact. It's going to be a problem. Said Rav Katina, it sounds like, let's say you could be betzamtzim. Let's say there's a way to get it perfectly in between. It sounds like, being that you don't have roiv, it would be tar. But Freik Rav Katina, in light of the machlokes Rav and Rav Kahana, I'm not so sure I understand this anymore. I used to understand this. Today, I'm not sure. I'm not tahirin. Why is it tar? Zilhacha ikaruba. Why don't we say that if it's mechza is kuroiv, so I end up having two roivs? If shechting half of the siman is considered roiv, then breaking a keli into two equal half parts should be the equivalent of having two roivs. It should be a problem. Amar Rapapa said, Trei rubi bechad monolek. There's no such thing as having two roivs in one keli. If all you need is one of the halves, you could say that one half is like the roiv. But if I have two halves and I have to don both halves, I can't say they're both roivs. It's a tarte desasri. As a result, it's not going to be okay. And Rashi just fears that in the case of shchita, so the mechza al mechza karoiv is only in the geya, the roiv that I shechted. That's really the only roiv that we care about. So this roiv that I actually slaughtered, or the mechza that I slaughtered, we could say a svara mechza al mechza karoiv. There's a shita of Rav. Isn't it a tarta desasri? Because that means the other half is also a roiv. You can't have two roivs. No, because I don't need the other half from a halachic status. I don't care about the other half. The only thing I care about is the half that I shechted. Is it a roiv or is it not a roiv? Rak al chatzi zeh anudanen. So if you could say mechza karoiv, it's going to be okay. But when you take the keli, break it into two, it's not enough for me to don one half. I have to don both halves. Because if any one of these halves is considered karoiv, I end up having a roiv. And there's an idea of trei rup b'chad monoleka, and therefore this is not going to be okay. The third word in the simon was gargeres. That's because the third tashma relates to a gargeres. Tashma, shachat chatzi gargeres, in the event that the shoichet shechted half of the kana, v'shaba kidei shchita acheres, and then he waited a shir the gamra, and he completed the shchita. Shchita seksher, the halach is the shchita is going to be kosher. Now we saw this halach already in yesterday's daf. Pashup shan and the halach is because although shia is one of the five halachas from Moshe Misinai, but shia means that once you start the shchita, you have to make sure that you do it without the shehiyah. In this case, when the shoichet shechted half of the gargeres, that was not considered a shchita because the first half of the gargeres, the first half of the kana, is nothing. It doesn't make it a treifa. There's no issues. Therefore, what happened in that first half is considered as if the shechita didn't start yet. Thus, if there's a shia, it's not a problem. It's as if the shia took place before the shechita. But what's the Gemara's kashviyah? If you're going to tell me, mechza karoiv, that mechza is really like karoiv, itrufala. In that case, we should say that when half of the gargeres was shachot, it rendered it a treifa. In other words, the Gemara's kasha is that if you're going to tell me that mechza is karoiv, that means when the shoichet went and he shechted half of the gargeres, it's as if he shechted roiv of the gargeres. Roiv of the gargeres is a bona fide shchita. If it's a bona fide shchita, that means you shechted the first siman, the siman of the gargeres. If you do a shia now, before you finish the shchita, it's a regular shia. Meaning, bishloima, if mechza is not karoiv, so then you didn't start the shchita when you did mechza. Thus, this shia is not a shia. But if mechza is karoiv, that means you finished the shchita of the first siman. Well, if that's the case, then the shia afterwards should be a regular shia. But the Gemara says, misavris behema? Who said that this halach is talking about a behema? Loi ba'oif, it's really talking about a knife. Who said it's talking about a behema? Maybe it's talking about a knife. What's the difference? Because if it's a oif, there's no issue. If you're going to tell me that mechza mechza is kiroiv, ha'avalei ruba, then you're done. Meaning, if mechza mechza is roiv, being that by oif all you need to do is shecht one siman, so at that point you got your one siman. If you got your one siman, you have nothing to worry about. What are you worried about? A shia? It's noch the shchita. Shia noch the shchita is not a problem. And if mechza mechza ain't a kiroiv, and if mechza mechza is not kiroiv, li'avavalei klum. Well then, that first mechza was nothing, so then the shia happened before the shchita. In other words, if we're talking about a behema, then it's a good kasha. Because on the tzad of mechza mechza kiroiv, which is shitas rav, then you have yourself a situation. You shechted the first siman, now there was a shia, you can't go ahead and shech the second siman, right? That was a shia. If anything, the first shchita ha'itshafal and made it into a treif, at that point you can't finish the shchita. If, however, we're dealing with a knife, all you need is one siman. If all you need is one siman, so even if mechza mechza is karoiv, well then you finish the shchita. And the Gemara just says the b'teres mamanav shach, because either way this case makes sense. If you hold mechza mechza is karoiv, then the shia is noch the shchita. And if mechza mechza is not karoiv, then the shia is far the shchita. But if you learn it's talking about oif, then you're not going to have a kash.
Zok the Gemara Tashma. One last Tashma. And that's going on the word pigima. Tashma, in the event that you had this chatzikana pagum of kolshu, and the sheikh went ahead and he was moisav a kolshu v'gamroi, and he completed shchitasik sheir. The halacha is the shchita is going to be kosher, right? This is the halacha that we've seen so many times in Masechtas Chulin. Now, if you're going to tell me that mechza mechza is karoiv, treifa havya, it should be considered a treifa. Meaning, this whole idea that we take for granted that a chatzikana pagum is considered kosher, in light of the fact that mechza mechza is karoiv, it doesn't make any sense. You should say that every time you have a chatzi kana pagum, it should be as if roiv of it is pagum. Shouldn't that be an issue? I mean, the Gemara's understanding that mechza mechza karoiv is a universal halacha. This is the second time we saw this, right? You saw it from the fact that the Gemara shtel to the klicheres, and now you're seeing it again from the fact that we're shtelling it to the chatzi kana pagum. But the Gemara is saying this whole chatzi kana pagum that we know as a universally accepted tenet of Masechtas Chulin only makes sense if chatzi is not roiv. But if every chatzi is always the equivalent of roiv, so every chatzi kana pagum should really be a treifa. My Rava said you have to say that even though Rav said chatzi mechza mechza is karoiv, but shanili and treifa, when it comes to treifas, it's different. The be'inan roiv hanirale nayim. When it comes to treifas, there it's not enough that it's roiv. You need a roiv hanirale nayim. It has to be a roiv that's very clear. That's a much better roiv, where you could see the roiv. You could look between the eyes, literally. Nirale nayim. So in the event that you have that kind of roiv, it's going to be okay. Otherwise not. Amalei Abaya. So Abaya told Rava. So Rava, basically what you're saying is that even though Rav has a shita mechza mechza's karoiv, and we believe it should be universally dispersed, but at the same time, when it comes to treifas, not. Treifas medafabin abeser. You can't just make something a treifa. For treif, it's not enough you have roiv. You need a roiv that's better than all the roivs of the Torah. Abaya told Rava, if you would ask me, I would say just the opposite. V'loi kol dechenu, that's another way of saying, v'loi kol shekenu, right? Shouldn't it be just the opposite? You find very often that something can become a treifa with a mashu. For example, an akuvas haveshet, right? A little hole in the veshet already renders it a treifa. But you're telling me now that when it comes to roiv, you need a roiv and then shchita, the ade ikarubalem is kasha. You don't find anywhere a mashu when it comes to shchita. You always need a roiv. Like kolshkein to be in a roiv and then certainly you should need a roiv and in other words, Rava, Abaya talking. Rava, what you're saying is really hepech hasvara. You're telling me when it comes to shchita, mechza mechza is roiv. But when it comes to treifas, mechza mechza is not roiv. You need a roiv and nine. It's just the opposite. When it comes to treifas, you find even a nekev is enough. For example, in the veshet, when we learn treifas, we'll see there's other times where a nekev in an organ can render the animal into a treifa. So if we're nekev be'etzim is enough, then when you need roiv, you need roiv anir leinayim, then kal v'chomer in shchita, where you don't find anywhere a nekev being enough, when you need roiv, it should have to be a faster roiv, it should have to be a roiv anir leinayim. Ela Abaya said, dekuli alma mechza mechza ene keroiv. No such thing as mechza mechza keroiv. There's no Rav that holds that if you go ahead and you shecht half of the simin, mechza mechza is keroiv. Either Mishnah says it's not, that's only midrabban. No. No such thing. Mechza mechza when it comes to shchita, when it comes to treifis, when it comes to klicheres, when it comes to any sugi in Shas, mechza mechza is not roiv. Roiv means roiv. Mechza mechza is not going to be considered a roiv. I have a machlokes Rav Kahana. They were arguing about something completely different. Le'inyan Pesach itmar. They were discussing Pesach, specifically the halachas of someone or a rabbin that are tamei when it came time to bring the carbon Pesach. So we know that if somebody was tamei, couldn't bring the carbon Pesach. What did he do? He got pushed off to Pesach Sheni. What if Roiv of Klai Yisrael were Tameh? So then the Tzibur was able to bring the carbon Pesach. They could bring a Betuma. It's a carbon Tzibur, it's Ba Betuma. Machlokes in the Gemara, Tama. Hutra Betzibur, Tama. Dechuya Betzibur. But the bottom line is, you can bring a Betuma. So when you discuss Tuma and the carbon Pesach, the numbers matter. You have to take a census and you have to figure out, right? Whoever's Tameh, please raise his hand. Whoever's Tar, please raise his hand. And, right, we have to figure out. We start tallying it up and we see where we're holding. Says Abaya, this machlokes Rabbi Rav Kahana was discussing that halach. Specifically, Haresha Hayu Yisrael Mechza Ta'irim Umechza Tameim. What would be if they counted up all the Jews and they were Mechza Ta'irim Umechza Tameim? Rav Amar, it's here that Rav said Mechza Mechza Karoiv. They get pushed off the Pesach Sheni. Rav Kahana Amar, I'm sorry, they could bring the carbon Betuma. Rav Kahana Amar, Rav Kahana said Mechza Mechza Ain't Karoiv. Get pushed off the Pesach Sheni. He says, Rav Hazam, my time in the Rav. And what's Pshat and Rav over there? If Rav and Kol HaTorah Kula holds Mechza Mechza is not Kiroiv, Shchita, Treifis, everywhere else, so how come by Pesach Sheni is it different? The Chsibikos, the Pasuk says, Ish Kiyeh Tamei Lo Nefesh, and we learn from the Ish Nitchavein Tzibur Nidachin. Dafka and Ish, the individual gets pushed off the Pesach Sheni, not a Tzibur. And Mechza Mechza is enough that they shouldn't be considered Ish. So is Mechza Mechza Roiv? No. But is Mechza Mechza Ish? If the Torah says, Ish, Mechza Mechza is enough roiv that it's not considered an ish, and that's why in the world of Pesach Sheni, where it's all about, are you ish? There, it's going to be different. Zok the Gemara, roiv echad ba'oif. So let's go back to the Mishnah, because really this next part of the Gemara is going to mamish tear apart the word after word of the Mishnah. So again, the Mishnah Chav Zayin Aleph was very straightforward, but it was also very redundant. Hashoichet echad ba'oif v'shnayim bebehema shchitas ikshera. So you have to check one siman by an oif, two simanim by behema. V'rubai shal echad kamayo. But you don't have to check the entire siman. Rubai kekulai. Rabbi Yehuda Omer at sheyishchet esavridin. Rav Chizda explained in yesterday's daf. Rabbi Yehuda was referring to shchitas oif, and it's not because of shchita, it's because of dam. In fact, you don't even have to shecht. At sheyinkoif, it just has to be b'shash shchita, when the dam is chayim, when it's hais. But by shchitas oifis, it's not enough to shecht the siman, you also have to shecht the veridin. Chatzi echad ba'oif, ve'echad v'chatzi bebehema, shchitas psula. We sort of knew that already. If Rubai Shalachat is Kamayu, that suggests that Mechza is not going to be okay. Roiv echad ba'oif v'roiv shnayim b'behema. If you get roiv of one by the oif, and roiv of two by the behema, shchitas ikshera, it's going to be kosher. How many times could the Mishnah in 5 lines say the same thing, right? So the Mishnah basically told me, if you think about it, 3 times, twice explicitly, once implicitly, that there's an idea of roiv when it comes to the siman. Rubai shalachat kamayu is 1, skipping. Roiv echad ba'oif, roiv shnayim b'behem shchitas ikshera is 2. Those are the 2 places that it's mentioned explicitly. Implicitly is chatzi echad ba'oif, echad b'chatzi b'behem shchitas psula, implying if it's half, it's not okay. Oh, mashma, if it's a little more than half, it's going to be okay. We're going to focus now on the 2 explicit mentions, the 2 times that it says mefurish in the Mishnah, Rachel bitcha haketana bak tzeiner mefurish, that if you shech the roiv of the siman, it's going to be okay. The Mishnah said it on the 2nd line, v'rubai shalachat kamayu, and then again on the last line, roiv echad ba'oif, roiv shnayim b'hemesh chitasik sheira. The Gemara's kasha is going to be the obvious kasha. That is why does the Mishnah have to tell me this halacha twice? Again, really 3 times for that already. Ayin, but the Gemara's focus is on the 2 times that it says in Mefurish in the Mishnah. So again, Roiv Echad Ba'oif, Tanina Chad Zimna. Didn't the Mishnah say it already? Right, sometimes Tanina Chad Zimna is like a Brisa or a Mishnah in Kalim or a Halas or Machshirin. Here it's like 3 lines earlier. Rubai Shal Echad Kamayu. How could the Mishnah tell me the same exact thing twice in the same breath, in the Zman of Teichedei Dibur? Hakash Pashach Simin. Again, A lot of simanim, pun intended. Rav Hoshia said, Chada bechulin, v'chada bekachem. You want to know why the Mishnah said it twice, because the Mishnah wanted you to know that we say Roiv Siman is considered a shchita when it comes to chulin, and it's true when it comes to kachem as well. We needed that. The Ashmin Chulin had only said Chulin Hassam, I would have thought, who decided beruba. When it comes to chulin, it's enough if you get Roiv. Mishum the lav lidam hu tzarech. Because when you shecht chulin, you don't need the blood. Why are you shechting chulin? To make the animal kosher. Avol kachem, when it comes to kachem, the lidam hu tzarech, where you need to make the animal kosher, but you also need the dam. I would think Roiv is not enough, because maybe in order to get all the dam out, maybe you would have to do a better shchita. The background to this is a Gemara in Zvachim, Daf Chaf Hei Amud Aleph, where the Gemara says that when you do shchita, you're supposed to get all the dam nefesh. So I would have thought that to get all the dam nefesh, it's not enough to do Roiv, and you maybe have to do everything like Tiskelei Beruba. Yeah, Shmin and Kachem had it said Kachem, I would have thought Mishum Dula Damu Tzarech. Maybe that's why over there you have to get right. But when it comes to Shchitas Chulin Dam Loy Tzarech, you don't need the dam at all. Maybe a half should be enough. Why would you think a half should be enough? I would refer to the first part of today's daf, but I would have thought that maybe a half should be enough. Kamash Malan, that's the chiddush. You want to know why it says Roiv in the Mishnah twice? One is Chulin, one is Kachem. There's a tzrichas of why you need both. Had it only said Chulin, I would have thought Kachem, you need everything. Had it only said Kachem, I would have thought Chulin, you don't even need Roiv. I would have known Mechza is going to be okay. Says the Gemara, Hai b'Chulin v'Hai b'Kachem. So you have two mentions. Which mention is referring to Chulin and which mention is referring to Kachem? Sounds a little bit like this is just an academic exercise, right? I mean, it doesn't matter. I don't know. One is Chulin, one is Kachem. At the end of the day, this is the halacha when it comes to Chulin and when it comes to Kachem. So I'm Berishayim, but this is going to be the avoid of the next part of the daf. Hai b'Chulin, v'hai b'Kachem. Rav Kahana said, by the way, we're not going to go through this, but if you want to just keep score on the siman, the hay of Akash was Hoshia, Rav Hoshia. He was the one who said, Chada b'Chulin, v'chada b'Kachem, and the kaf is Rav Kahana, who's addressing not the kasha of why it says it twice, but Hai b'Chulin, Hai b'Kachem. But either way, so Rav Kahana said, Mistaber Reish b'Chulin v'seiv b'Kachem. It's Mistaber that the Reishna, the first mention of it is referring to Chulin, and the second is referring to Kachem. Why do I think that? Because what was the name of the parak? The name of the parak is Hashoichet. And what did it start with? Echad ba'oif. If you're going to tell me the race is talking about Kachem, we should be moving along in the beginning of parak HaMoilek, not moving along in the beginning of parak Hashoichet. So the fact that we started off Hashoichet as Ha'oif, so obviously we're talking about Chulin. Because if we're talking about oif of kachem, chatas oif of oilas oif, then it would have said amalek. But the Gemara says, "Elo, my sefer b'kachem." So you're telling me the sefer is talking about kachem, right? Well, if that's the case, shchitasoi ksheira milikasoi. What's the sefer? Roiv echad ba'oif, v'roiv shnayim bebehema, shchitasoi ksheira. If that part is talking about kachem, then as it relates to the roiv echad ba'oif al kopanim, it's the same milikasoi ksheira. So the Gemara says, "Holy kasha, that's not a kasha." Because I did the solik mi behema tani nam shchitasoi ksheira. Because the sefer mentions sai roiv echad ba'oif and sai roiv shnayim bebehema, and the roiv shnayim bebehema, even if it's kachem, it's shchita. So therefore, it says shchitasoi ksheira because of the last thing that was mentioned was roiv shnayim bebehema. So once it says shchitasoi ksheira, so we're gonna again poetic symmetry versus halachic accuracy. We're gonna just run with shchitasik sheira, even though it should have said shchitasik sheira, malachik sheira, depending if you're talking about an oif or a behema, respectively. The reason we didn't do that is just to keep it uniform. El reisha, but as it relates to the reisha, you can't say that Torah. You know why? Because mechti al oif kai. The first thing mentioned in the Reisha is Oif, then Behema. And Isol G'daitach Bekachin, HaMoilik Mibayle, it should have said Moilik. So Rav Kahana said, the Reisha must be the Chulin and the Seifa must be the Kachin. Now I know that because the Reisha starts HaSheichet Echad B'Oif. And if it's Kachin, it would have said HaMoilik Echad B'Oif. Okay, so the Seifa is Kachin? Roiv Echad B'Oif, Rav Shnai B'Behema, Shchitasik Sheira, it should say Melikasik Sheira. No, the Seifa, it says Shchitasik Sheira, Agav Behema. Okay, so maybe in the Reish it says Hashoichet Echad Ba'oif, Agav Behema. Now here's the difference. In the Seifa, it says Oif first, Behema second. The last thing it said was Behema. Behema requires Shchita. The Shchita is going on Madasalik Mineh, on the thing that you mentioned immediately prior to it. And being that was Behema, and the right word grammatically over there is Shchita, so therefore we say the word Shchita because the last thing that was mentioned requires a Shchita, and then we'll throw in already the Oif instead of being super wordy. But in the Reisha, where again the Oif is mentioned first and the Behema second, but you're starting with Oif, so there you have to start right. You can't tell me, I do what I'm going to tell you in a minute, I'm going to start off inaccurately. Right? There's a whole Shulchan Aruch of poetic symmetry. Even poetic symmetry works with certain guidelines. But the bottom line is, Hashoichet echad ba'oif makes no sense. You can't start shchitas oif if you're dealing with kachim. But to say roiv echad ba'oif roiv shnayim bebehema shchitasik shera, to refer even to oif, being that it's going on behema, which I mentioned right before, that in and of itself is going to be okay. Rav Simi bar Ashi Amar, he said a different mahalach in terms of how I know that the Reisha is Chulin and the Seif is Kachim. He said Reisha b'Chulin like Rav Kana. I agree. But Mehach, I know from somewhere else. Like Tani, because what did the Mishnah say? Echad ba'oif. Right? It started, Hashoichet echad ba'oif. He's talking about Kachim. He's talking about Kachim. How could you say just the unequivocally Hashoichet echad ba'oif? There's two types of oifis of kachim. There's a chatas oif, there's an oilos oif. Chatas oif is echad ba'oif, but an oilos oif is shnayim. So how can you tell me echad ba'oif? So it must be it's referring to chulin, because by chulin it's always echad ba'oif. But the Gemara says, "Ela, my sefer b'kachim." You tell me the sefer is talking about kachim. Well, if that's the case, roiv echad ba'oif, ha'ika oilos oif to ba'oif shnei simanim. It also doesn't work because the sefer also says roiv of echad, and if it's kachim, then it means also oilos oif, and the oilos oif needs to. So the Gemara says, "No, my roiv echad, roiv called echad ve'echad." The way you could teach Roiv echad means roiv of each one. Roiv of each one. Meaning, roiv of the one when it's a chatas oif, and roiv of each one of the two when it's a oilas oif. By behema, it just says v'roiv shnayim, because by behema, it's always two. By an oif, where sometimes it's one and sometimes it's two, so roiv echad means roiv of each individual one. By the behema, where it's always two, so there we just say roiv shnayim. And the truth is, ubedinu the listening roiv shnayim. Now you'll ask me, why did it say roiv shnayim by oif, like it said by behema? It could have, would have, should have, but it wouldn't work. Because given the ikka the chatas, the sagile bechad semen, because being that this chatas oif, that it's enough to have one, so therefore it's not true that it's going to be two. So la'olam the seifa is talking about kachim, and it says roiv echad ba'oif, it means roiv shakol echad echad. Okay, so why don't we say the same thing in the Reisha? Hashoichet echad ba'oif, it's referring to kachim, and hashoichet echad ba'oif would also mean echad, one if it's chatas oif, or echad if it's oil oif. Can't even say it with a straight face. It doesn't work. In the Sefer it works. You could say roiv shel kol echad ve'echad. Hashoichet echad ve'echad just doesn't work. So therefore, said the Gemara, Rav Simi bar Ashi, that the Reisha is the one that's chulin, the Sefer is the one that kachim, and that's how I know it. Rav Papa said the same thing. You want to know which one's chulin, which one's kachim, Reisha b'chulin, but I know from a different place. I know it from the following Makar. The Ketani Rabbi Yehuda said the Shishchas V'ridin. Rabbi Yehuda said you have to shech the V'ridin. Pli Rabban Olad, Rabban Wachaylik. Now, Amr b'shleim b'chulin, b'shleim of the first part of the Mishnah that Rabbi Yehuda is commenting on is referring to chulin shapir. I understand why Rabbi Yehuda would say it, but that the Chachamim would be chaylik. But if you're going to tell me the Reish Mishnah is talking about kachim, I plead Rabbanan alel. Why would the Rabbanan argue? It's pashut that the Rabbanan hold that you have to shech the veridin when it comes to kachim. You know why? Because who atzmei ladam mutzach? The whole purpose of shchitas kachim, second time we saw this, is for the dam. Now, it's also for the dam, right? But the dam is something that you need. And the whole idea of the veridin is to get all the dam. So for sure you should have to shech the veridin. There's no way the chacham ma'chaylik to Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to shechting the veridim and shchitas kachim. They can only be chaylik when it comes to shchitas chulin. If there's a machloik, Rabbi Yehuda is the one that said, the chachamim are chaylik, must be the Reish is talking about chulin. And it's Dafka the Sefer that's referring to Kachin. Rav Ashi said, Sefer bekachin mehacha. Rav Ashi says, I agree. Reisha b'chulim Sefer bekachin, but let me tell you how I know the Sefer is referring to Kachin. Diktani, because the Sefer said, now this Sefer is actually a Mishnah on Daf Lamed Amud Beis. But the Sefer of our Mishnah, Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, obviously connect to the beginning of the Mishnah on Lamed Amud Beis. And what does it say over there? Hashoichet shnei roshin ke'echad. If somebody goes and he shechts two heads of an animal in one shot, right? So this person is multitasking, time management. He's have all these animals to shecht. So he takes a big sword and boom, he knocks all of them out in one shot. So if somebody goes and he shechts shnei roshin ke'echad, shchitasik sheir, it's fine. Now, it's mashma shoichet diavad in l'chatchila. It sounds like this only works, but diavad doesn't work l'chatchila. Why doesn't it work l'chatchila? Right? Again, this diak that permeates the entire beginning of Chulin. Why could this not work like Chatchilas? The Gemara is like this. If you're going to tell me that the Sefer of the Mishnah is talking about Kachim, meaning that Mishnah, I understand why the Chachil is not allowed to do it. It's based on something that Rabbi Yosef once said. Rabbi Yosef had a brisa that said the following. It says in the Torah, tizbachu. And from this word, tizbachu, the Brisa learns two halachas. Number one, tizbach, and we learn from this, you can't have two shaychtim, you can only have one shaychet. Tizbachu, you can't have one shaychet two zvachim. So you can't have two shaychtim and one zevach, you can't have one shaychet and two zvachim. But Rav Kahana said, how do you know all this? Because tizbachahu ksiv. It's based on where Rashi explains yesh aim le'misayris. So we know it's machlokes and chas. Yesh aim le'mikra, yesh aim le'misayris. Do we halachically derive laws from psukim based on the pronunciation of the word, or based on the way the word is written? This tizbachu falls into that category where there's a yeshem lemikra spin and there's a yeshem lemesayra spin. Why? Because if you read the word, it says tizbachuhu. Tizbachuhu is very lashon rabbidik, but if you look at the word inside, it's pronounced as if it would have said tizbachahu. Why is that? Because between the ches and the he in the word, there's no vav. There's a vav at the end of the he, but there's no vav in between the ches and the he. What's the difference? Tizbachahu is in the singular. Tizbachuhu is in the plural. Rav Kahana said that this Bryson is of the opinion Yeshem le'misayres. So therefore, we darshan over here as if it said Tizbachahu. Okay, so what emerges from that? Tizbach in the singular, that's the tizbachahu. Tizbach in the singular, shloyeyu shnayim shaychtim zevach echad. One zoyveach, only one shaykh, you can't have two shaychtim. And the tizbachuhu, which is exclusive, tafke it, as opposed to it and something else, shloyehei echad shaykhet shnei zvachim. What's the bottom line? The bottom line is this halacha that one shaykhet, two animals, is going to be an issue, that's a kachim de halacha. When it comes to chulin, you don't even find anything like that. So if the Mishnah daf lamed on the base says hashoichet b'di'evin l'chatchila loy, when it comes to hashoichet shnei roshin ke'echad, it must be talking about kachim. It must be leveraging this halacha over here that's learned out from the carbon shlamim v'chisis b'chuz evach shamad l'Hashem l'rtzoinchem tizbachu. Why? Because let's see it inside. Because if you can tell me that Mishnah is talking about chulin, I feel l'chatchila nami, then it's something that would good be fine. Even l'chatchila must be that the Mishnah Lamed Amud Beis that talks about issues of shechting two behemoths in one shot. Again, it says it's kosher, but only b'di'evet. So clearly, there's issues that must be talking about kachim. And if that Mishnah or that is talking about kachim, that means the seif of our Mishnah is also probably talking about kachim, right? Let's explain this a little bit better. If the reish of our Mishnah is kachim, and then the seif of our Mishnah is chulin, and then the Mishnah Lamed Amud Beis is kachim, so we're all over the place. Kachim, chulin, kachim. It's more symmetrical. If the reish of our Mishnah is chulin, and then the seif of our Mishnah is kachim, and then the Mishnah daf lamed is right, they're also kachim. So we started talking about chulin, which is the sugya de jour, right? Pun intended. And then we go from there, and we pivot into kachim, and then another halacha of kachim. In that instance, this is all going to make a little bit more sense. The bottom line is, we had 4 makayres already from the Mishnayos, Minei Ubei, that it's the Reisha that's talking about Chulin, and that it's the Sefer that's talking about Kachim. Rav Kahana said that it was Mistaber Reisha b'Chulin v'Sefer b'Kachim. Right? What was his raya? His raya was because it starts off Hashoichet Esaif. It doesn't start off Hamoilek Esaif. Rav Simi Barashi said that it's Mistaber that the Reisha is talking about Chulin. Why? Because it says Hashoichet Echad Ba'oif. And if it's talking about Kachim, it's not necessarily Echad. If it's a Chattasayif, it would be Echad. But what about if it's Oilasayif? In that instance, it would be Shnayim. Rav Papa said the Reish I know is talking about Chulin because it's only Rabbi Yehuda that says you have to Shach the Veridin. Right? Chum don't say that. Oh, must be. It's because it's talking about Chulin. Because by Kachim for sure, yeah. And Rav Ashi said it's because I know the Seif is talking about Kachim. The Seif as in the Mishnah Lamed Amud Beis. So it's Mistaber that what immediately comes before it is also talking about Kachim. Because if the Reish is Kachim and the Seif is Chulin, then you're going to tell me Kachim, Chulin, Kachim. That doesn't make so much sense. The bottom line is we just Tura Dorach, the Mishnah Geschmack, 4 rayas from the Mishnah from 4 different Amayram, all symbolized in that siman, that the Reish is Chulin, the Seif is Kachim. Just one diktuk haloshen. If you look at Rav Kahana said, Mestabra Reisha b'Chulin. Rav Simi Barashi said, Reisha b'Chulin mehacha. Rav Papa said, Reisha b'Chulin mehacha. What did Rav Ashi say? Seifa b'Kachim mehacha. The first 3 Amayram said, I know the Reish is Chulin. The 4th Amay Rav Ashi said, I know the Seif is Kachim. Right? You can miss this. What's the diktuk? The diktuk is the first three Amayram were coming from the Reisha. Hashoichet, Hamaylet, Echad, Shnayim. The Chachamim Achoylik on the Veridin. These are three rayas from the Reisha that the Reisha is talking about Chulin. Rav Ashi said, Ilcha Raya as the safest kachim. Because if the safest, I know about the Reisha. I know the safest kachim. You know I know the safest kachim? Because the Mishnah Daf Lamed is kachim. And it makes more sense that it's Chulin kachim and not kachim Chulin kachim. That's why the first three Amayram said Reisha b'Chulin, and Rav Ashi, the fourth Amayra, said Seifa b'kachim. Either way, the Gemara says we're not done yet. Va'af Rab Shimon ben Lakish savar Reisha b'Chulin v'Seifa b'kachim. Rab Shimon ben Lakish also said Reisha b'Chulin v'Seifa b'kachim. By the way, doesn't Rav Ashi always get the last word? So how come here Reish Lakish is getting the last word? It's because, look at the signon of the Gemara. As if the Amayram sat down and they went through, and there Rav Ashi Taka got the last word. Right, don't say Reish Lakish Amar. The Gemara, you should know, 150 years ago, Reish Lakish also said this. This is like a postscript, P.S. on the bottom of the letter. Postscript, you should know, is like a rate bite. You should know, the ganze Shmu is, Reish Lakish also said the same thing. What did Reish Lakish say? Reish Lakish said the following. He said, being that in the Reish of the Mishnah says, so why do you have to have Reish Shnayim Bebehema? So he said as follows. Because we learned in the Mishnah, Masechtes Yuma, the Mishnah over there is talking about the avodah that was done by the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. So we know all the avodah that was done on Yom Kippur was done by the Kohen Gadol. And specifically, we're talking about when he brought the Tamid Shel Shachar. They brought him the Karmid Tamid. Kartzoi, he did Shchita. And then somebody went and he finished the job. He completed the Shchita. Mirek means to be mashlam. Someone went and he was mashlam the Shchita. Now, why did someone else do the hashlam of the Shchita? Why didn't he do it himself? It's because he had to do the Kabbalah. He's very much on call right now. So being that he had to do the Kabbalah, he couldn't be mashlam the Shchita, but somebody else was mashlam the Shchita. Yachol loy mirek apostle said Reish Lakish. You see, the Mishnah says that someone had to be mirek. So you could have had a havamina that in the event that this mirek didn't happen, it would be possible. That's why we have the second mention. Second mention is talking about kachim. Also, the Reish is the Chulin and the Seifa is the kachim. You see it from Reish Lakish. But the Seifa is talking about kachim to teach me that even though there's an Inyan of Miruk, but the Miruk is not Ma'akiv. Says the Gemara, Reish Lakish said that we need a Mishnah in Chulin Chav Zayin to teach me halacha negeya, that Mishnah in Yuma, Daf Lamed, by the way, that you should know that the Miruk is not Ma'akiv. How could you have a Havamina the Miruk is Ma'akiv? Im Kain, if the Miruk is Ma'akiv, Havalei Avodah Ba'acher. It would come out that the Kohen Gadol should have to do it. Because if not, you're violating the principle of an Avodah being done on Yom Kippur by an Acher, by a Zar. V'tanya, we learned to the Brayso, Kol Avodah Yisem Mikbaring Ksheres Alabai. It can't be that there should be a havamina walking away from that Mishnah that the Miruk is Ma'akiv. That I should need a Mishnah in Chulin Chav Zayin to tell me not that way. Because if you're going to tell me it's Ma'akiv, then it should have to be done by the Kohen Gadol. And you see clearly the Kohen Gadol did not have to be the one that did it. So the Gemara says, Hachi Kamar. You have to say what Reish Lakish meant to say was as follows. Yochel yeh pasam d'Rabban. The Mishnah in Chulin is coming to address not that it's not pasam d'Oraisa. If it was pasam d'Oraisa, if it was ma'akiv midday rice, you would need the Kohen Gadol to do it. So I know minei obey from the Mishnah in Yuma, from the fact that a zar, a non-Kohen Gadol is allowed to do it, that's a raya that it's not something that's going to be ma'akiv. Stating that, I could have thought that maybe midrabanan it's going to be a problem. The Solkatayt Chamina, I would have thought ikupsul midrabanan. By the way, the whole concept of a psul drabanan and kachim is always a little bit of a chiddush. But I could, Kayan was reasoning, but I could have thought that maybe there's a psul drabanan. Lakach shoninu roiv echad ba'oif. That's why the Mishnah had to come lafuk. It says, so what's it all about? Meaning, you're telling me now that you can do roiv. It's not ma'akiv b'di'evet, because then the Kohen Gadol would have to do it. Even midrabanan, it's not a problem. That's why the Mishnah told me roiv twice in the Mishnah in Chulin. Once to tell me Chulin, once to tell me kachim, that halach. So why are you doing it? Why is somebody doing it? Mitzvah l'marik. There's a mitzvah l'marik. And if you learn the Rishonim here, and even more so in Yuma, it's mashma mitzvah l'marik is related to this idea that you're supposed to try to get all the blood. And being that you're supposed to try to get all the blood, so therefore, right, we saw betchilas hasugya. What's the whole idea of, I need to know roiv works by Chulin, I need to know roiv works by kachim? Because had I not known that Roiv works by Kachim, so there could have been a Havamina, Ben Benoishel Havamina, that maybe I need all of it. Why would I need all of it? Because I have to get all the dam to do this rigor. That is what the mitzvah l'marik is. Pashab. The mitzvah l'marik is, there's an idea of going ahead and getting all the dam. Either way. The next part of the daf really is a sugya that's going to go knee deep into tomorrow's daf. If we were like 8 lines lower, I would say we stop here, but we're too high up on the Amid, so we have to go weiter. Zok the Gemara, Amar Rab Shimon ben Lakish. Rab Shimon ben Lakish said, it's all location of those 2 dots. It's amazing how those 2 dots control our daf yomi life. So Rab Shimon ben Lakish said, in the name of Levi Saba, Levi the elder, Eino l'shchita ela l'besayf. Rabbi Yochanan said, no, yesh no l'shchita mitchila v'atzayf. So we sort of knew this sugya was going to appear somewhere in the sugyas of shchita. This is a big sugya. So what's the machlokes of ein l'shchita el l'besayf or yesh no l'shchita mitchila v'atzayf? So Rashi says very pashut. Ein l'shchita, 3 lines from the top. Ein shchita kriya shchita el l'besayfa. A shchita is called a shchita when you finish the shchita. What happens up until that? Heisnish kan shchita keilu. Yesh no l'shchita hakol kari shchita. Meaning shchita involves 2 simanim. Let's say it takes 10 seconds to do a shchita. So that 10 seconds. Is the whole 10 seconds shchita? Or no, the 10th second, when you're finishing, it's then that it's going to be considered a shchita. And this is the machlokes. Reish Lakish said in the name of Levi Saba, Eino l'shchita ela b'soif. Rabbi Yochanan said, Yesh no l'shchita mitchila v'atzayf. In other words, machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Amar Rav. So the Gemara clarifies what the machlokes is, not before it gets involved a little bit in what the machlokes is. Rabbi said, how come everybody agrees? Let's say a guy would check the first siman, the siman echad Yisrael, and then a yid would check the second siman. Shipsul. Everybody agrees it's possible. I mean, you could add a havamina. If you hold yesh no l'shchita mitchila v'atzayf, so if a guy shechts the first, the yid shechts second, it's a problem. But if you hold ein l'shchita ela b'soif, the shchita really doesn't happen until it's over. Who cares what happened in the beginning, right? It's irrelevant. All I care about is the ending. I care about how it finished. So a guy did, why it should be a problem? But Rava said this is a moot point. You know why? Because if the guy's going to shech the first siman, it's going to be a treifa, right? If he shechted the veshet first, so the neck made it a treifa. And even if it was the kana, once he shechted roiv, it's for sure a treifa. So it's for sure, even though applicable to the lumdis of the machlokes Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, but from a pure halacha l'maisa perspective, it's neither here nor there. Additionally, Rava said, as it relates to the oila sa'if, heichad the malik simen echel lamata. If the kohen would do the malika of the first simen lamata, now the malika of the oila sa'if was supposed to be done lamayla michot hasikra, but let's say he would do it lamata in the wrong place, the simen echel lamayla, and then he would do the next simen lamayla psul would be possible. Everybody holds it's possible. Meaning, what's Rav is trying to say? At first glance, maybe it's totally in the shaila. Because if you hold that ein l'shchita ela l'besayf, probably you're also going to hold ein l'malika ela b'sayf, right? It's a little bit of a leap. But you're probably also going to hold ein l'malika ela b'sayf. So I only care about what happened at the end. As long as I got it right at the end, I did the malika in the right place. So who cares what I did in the beginning? But no, it's for sure going to be possible. Everybody agrees that. You know why? Because when you did the malika simen echad lamata, even though it's only a tchila shchita, ve'ena l'shchita ela l'besayf, but in the world of chata soif, it's a fartig shchita, or malika, right? It's fartig in the world of chata soif. I mean that it's fartig in the world of chata soif, that gives it a chshivas, that for sure it should render it possible. So says Rava, even though at first glance, I know what you're thinking, you're going to start jumping all over the place with this machlokes and making all these sushals. Let me take 2 things off the board immediately. Number 1, do not tell this suit to a case where a guy shechted the first siman. You'll say that if enel shchita ela b'soif, it should be kosher. No, because even though you might be right in lumdus, but you made it into a treifa. Additionally, if the malik of the first siman of the oif was done lamata, you would think also, who cares? No, because being that it is a malika for the chatas oif, it's a choshev ma'isa malika, and a choshev ma'isa malika for sure would make it possible. Okay, so when are we arguing? I'll give you an example. Somebody shecht in one siman of an animal, where it was kachim, and the others, he shechted b'fnei. So the shchita, the first siman is considered shchita mechayiv, is going to be chayiv. He's not going to be chayiv. That's an example. So Rava said, you want to know where there's a good example, a good sushal of this? That's where the sushal is going to be. It's going to be in the event that the first siman was shachot b'chutz, the second siman was shachot b'fnim, l'chei would be very much totally in this shaila. Amalei Rabba Bar Simi said, Mar loy amar hachi. So Rabba Bar Simi turns to Rava and he says, the Rebbe didn't say this. So who's he talking to Rava? Who is he referring to when he says Mar? So we know that Rava has two Rabbeim. Rabba is his Rebbe and Rabbi Yosef is his Rebbe. He's referring to Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef, right? We commented the Gemara's Kasha when we said who's Mar. So who is Mar? Which one of Rava's Rebbe? It's Rabbi Yosef. What did Rabbi Yosef say? He said, in the event that you would check one siman b'chutz and one siman b'fnim, the halacha is, even if you hold ina l'shchita ela l'besoif, it would still be shchutei chutz. You know why? Shari osa b'maisa chatas ha'oif b'chutz. Because if somebody would shecht, let's get this carefully, a chatas ha'oif b'chutz, it would be considered shchitas chutz. Why? Because oifes are included in the parasha of shchutei chutz. Even though if you go through Perek Zayin and Vayikra, which we went through a little bit yesterday, but if you go through Perek Zayin and Vayirki, you'll see there's no mention there of the oifes, but based on ribuyim with marba oifes. Additionally, even though a oif of kachim requires malika, but if somebody shechts b'chutz, he's going to be chayiv. In fact, if someone's moiluk b'chutz, he's potter. Sugi is in Ashaycha v'mayl. But it's only if you shecht b'chutz, you're going to be chayiv. But here's the point. If somebody would shecht the siman echad, in the event that it was a chatas ha'oif b'chutz, it would be considered a shchutei chutz. So too, even if you hold ina l'shchita ela b'soif, if you shecht one siman, even of a behema, it's going to be a problem. So that's also not the case of the machlekes. Where did they argue? With the sheichet shechted a miyut of the simanim chutz, with just a little bit he did. He didn't even do a full siman. And then he completed it b'fnim. According to man, the mother holds yeshel and shchina b'tchila v'atzoif, mechayiv is going to be chayiv. I only shechted a miyut, doesn't matter, he's still going to be chayiv. If you hold en shchita el b'soif, loy mechayiv, you're not going to be chayiv. Now this is a good application, said Rabba Bar Simi, quoting Rav Yosef of the machlokes, and the reason is because over here, that miyut that you did b'chutz does not have an equivalent thereof where it would be considered some chashuv inyan. And being that you don't have that equivalent thereof, so it's for that reason this would be a good example of where you have the machlokes. Again, we have machlokes Rabbi Yechon Rish Lakish, yesh lo shchita mitchila v'atzoif, en lo shchita el b'soif. Is the shchita only considered shchita when you finish it, or once you start it already? At that point, it's going to be considered a shchita. It's a huge machlokes. This is something that comes up in different places in Shas. It's going to take us knee deep into tomorrow's daf, but at the same time, what we saw today is that there's a huge qualification to this machlokes, because it's mavur that if you do a shchita, even if it's not the full shchita, and even if you hold eno the shchita el b'soif, but what you did is a ma'isa chashav on some level, then that in and of itself could be considered a shchita, and everybody would agree that we view it as a shchita. We don't see eno shchita el b'soif. As a matter of fact, what emerged was three hechatimses where even if you hold eno shchita el b'soif, it could be we'd reckon with the tchila shchita. First is if a goy shechts it, and that's simply because once a goy shechts the first siman, he made it into a treifas. According to everybody, it's going to be possible. Even though in the lumdus of eno shchita el b'soif, I could hear not, but lamaisi he made it possible. The second was in the event that you went and you shechted or did malika on the oilas ha'oif lamata, you would think, even though it's the wrong place, but as long as I get the end of it, lamaila, that should be okay. But being that it's considered a malika for a chatas ha'oif, that gives it a chshivas, even if ein l'shchita el b'soif and ein l'malika el b'soif. But over here it's going to be chashiv. The third, which is the machlokes, is really Rav and Rabbi Yosef, and that is what would be in the event that you shechted one siman b'chutz and then one siman b'fnim. There is makom to say that too would be a situation where you don't have the machlokes, because shchita siman echad bechatas ha'oif, based on all the ribuyim in Perek HaSheicha v'Hamayla, is considered a shchutei chutz. And it could be even in that situation you wouldn't have a case of ein l'shchita. When then would you have? If you shechted a miyut of it b'chutz, that would be an example where you don't find anywhere that a miyut of a siman is considered a chashav shchita, and then you finish the bifnim. That miyut you would think should be mechayim mi b'chutz, even though it's only a miyut, by the way, but you would think it should be mechayim mi b'chutz. Kamash Malon, that's a hechatimtza where it'd be negeya this shaila of yeshno l'shchita matchila v'atzoif or eno l'shchita ela l'besoif exhale. So just to end with one ha'ara.
It's Shekava Maramakim that Nachi Weinstein showed me. So shout out to Nachi and the Svarim chatter. And that is, so there was a very, very important classic diktuk and grammar work that was written circa late 15th century, early 16th century by a great gadol whose name was Rebbe Eliyahu Bacher. The sefer that he wrote is called Sefer HaTishbi. He wrote other svarim as well, but the Sefer HaTishbi is his most famous work, and it was a sefer that was written on diktuk, and this is a sefer that received tremendous acclaim by Gedolei Yisrael throughout the generations. Rabbi Yaakov Emden wrote Haggais, it's called Ezer Or. On Sefer HaTishbi, we have Igris from the Pri Megadim, where he quotes the Sefer HaTishbi many, many different times. As a matter of fact, in one place, the Pri Megadim talks about the Sefer HaTishbi, and he says that the Sefer HaTishbi, when it comes to diktuk, is Neman Yosem B'Meya Eidim. He is the authority when it comes to all these things. They say that the Vilna Gaon said that the Sefer HaTishbi, Rebbe Eliyahu Bacher, he was the one that was mechavin, betachlus, when it came to all things related to diktuk. Just one interesting anecdote to the Sefer HaTishbi, written by Rebbe Eliyahu Bacher. By the way, the Sefer is very often referred to as the Tishbi, and Rebbe Eliyahu Bacher is very often referred to as Bacher. He wasn't a Bacher. He was married, but his name was Rebbe Eliyahu Bacher, but he wrote a book. He actually wrote the first Yiddish novel of all time. Can't make this up. This was a fictional novel, and it was called Baba Buch. That was the name. And there's a Yesh Omrim, there is a legend that says that Rebbe Eliyahu Bacher, the Tishbi's Baba Buch, is the source, it's the makar to what we know today very fondly as Bubba Mises. But the bottom line is, the very first Yiddish novel ever written was the Baba Buch. It was written by the Tishbi. He was German, hence Baba Buch. He lived most of his life in Italy, so he falls under the umbrella of Italian Jews. Either way, in his Sefer HaTishbi, under the Ois Vav, he has an entry called Veshet. Veshet of Kana Uveshet fame. That's the Tishbi. Veshet, Kana Uveshet, see Chulin 28a. Or you could just say, see Chulin. HaVeshet, hu Masha Eitzel HaKana. Said Rebbe Eliyahu Bacher, the Veshet is the pipe that's next to the trachea. That's where all Meichel and Mishta go through. There are some that say that the reason it's called Veshet is because it's meluchluch, it's disgusting. And take a look at the Targum on Vayives, it says Vishat. So the reason the Veshet, the esophagus, is called the Veshet, because let's be honest, right? Nobody wants to look over there. It's disgusting. It's where the food that after you chew is going down. And it's for that reason it's called the Veshet Miloshen Vishat. V'zetos Gemura, says the Tishbi. Ki vav shel Vishat, he shimushes. The vav of the word Vishat is shimushes. Shroshay, what's the shirish of Vayivez? The shirish of Vishat, it's Sha'at. Min bishat benefesh, see Yecheskel 25:15. Aber v'havav shel veshet, the vav of veshet, he shroshes. That's part of the shirish, and if that's the case, it's a tois. In fact, v'lo yodati shmoi b'loshen Ashkenaz gambalaz. And then the Tishmi says, I'm not sure how you say esophagus today in English, or how you say it b'loshen Ashkenaz gambalaz. He probably meant Italian. He's in Italy when he's writing the sefer. But the bottom line is, he says, I'm not really sure how to say it in any other language, but this idea that the word Veshen is called Veshen, Miloshen Vayives, Esav Zabachayra, it's the Targum of Vishat. This is like a Taz Gemura, because the Vav of Vishat is Shimushes. The Shirish of Vayives is Sha'at, right? Vayives is Vishat, right? Had the word said boys, bez, so it would have said Sha'at, because it says Vayives. So that prefix, that Vav, is Shimushes, it's Mishamish, it's assisting, it's a handle to the Shirish of the word. That's where the Vav comes from. But the Vav of the word Veshesh is Shiroshes, it's part and parcel of the Shirish of the word. This Shirish is Sha'at, this Shirish is Vishat, or Veshet, not the same word. And that Yesh Omrim is a Ta'os Gomer. If you take a look at Rabbi Yaakov Emden's Haggah, on this entry of the Tishbi, it says as follows. He says, Veshet, whoever hacholul she'etzel hakana.
So that's the Ivra Cholol, that's the tube that's next to the trachea. Kana B'Lashon Chazal Gargeres, right? We had that in the beginning of today's daf. U'B'Lashon Torah Garoin, and B'Lashon Ashkenaz, Gurgel. Veshet, B'Lashon Ashkenaz, is the Schlung, Uder, Ratzoloymar Gid Habliya. This is what Rabbi Yaakov Emden says. Then he says as follows. This is not shaykh. Umasha Amar. This that he said. V'yesh Oimrim sheyikra came bavur shehu meluchloch ubazoi miloshen vayivas Esav targum v'shat al yehezer rachuk beinecha. Don't let that pshat be so rachik. Afal pisha hu zal kasav. Even though he himself said shezu tos gemura lios havav shal veshet shimushes. Right? It's taught us to say that that's what it is. The vav of Ayivez, that is shimushes. But to say that the vav of Veshet is shimushes, no, it's shrushes. The aim beklach klum. Abazak Rabbi Yaakov Emden is aim beklach klum. It's classic Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Shalaroiv hahergel shemishtam shemeshem milois halalu habam alaroiv smuchim edvuchim ba'amr kanu Veshet. He said the reason the vav became part of the word is because the word Veshet always comes together with kana. You don't just say Veshet. You say the kana and the veshet. V'akana mukta b'loshen. And you always say the kana first, right? When you learn Masechtas Chulin, it's not the veshet and the kana, it's always the kana and the veshet. Al kain hutzrich levav shimushes. That's why the word veshet, the real word was shut maybe, but the word shut needed a vav shimushes. You know, because it always comes after something that it's coming together with. It's always part two of a two-part series. So it's for that reason, being that it always came after the kana, so therefore it always needed that vav shimushes. So afal pisha shrosha is shut. Believe of, but yuchser havav, being that the word is always mentioned, almost, do an analytic. You're going to see it's always mentioned with the vav, so therefore the vav became part of the shirish, l'roi v'regilos. So if you have a word that so often is used together with a vav shimushes or some other shimushes, that could become part of the word. He says, "V'dugmas." He says, "I know you're all rolling your eyes now. Make a taste it." He says, "I'll give you a makar to this." He said, "Take a look at the word va'ed." Shehila das ibn Ezra, which according to the Ibn Ezra, what's that word va'ed? Right, va'ed. What does va'ed mean? Mila kitzara. Ibn Ezra says it's a mila kitzara. Ki'ilu yoymar la'olam ve'ad olam. Va'ed is really a way of saying la'olam ve'ad olam. It's really not the word va'ed. The word of va'ed is ad. That vav always came together with the yad, because you say from now until then. So being that it was always ve'ad, so we almost created a new word called va'ed, and it looks, feels, smells, tastes, sounds like the vav is shrushes, but really it's not. Because if you go back to the etymology of the word was really ad, the vav was shimushes, but it was used so often that it became part of the shrushes. Sha'avav shimushes, v'shaval shrushes, said Ibn Ezra. L'roiv dibuk. I have another good one. B'milas kruvim. This is great. The word kruvim, right? What's the word kruvim? Kiravya. It's like a child. Really, the word is ravya. It's not kiravya. I think we even spoke about this a little bit. It's not kiravya. The word was really ravya. So then why is it kruvim in the Torah? Why was it kruvim? It's ruvim. Kiravya. The kruvim were like a ravya. So why is it always like that? But being that it was often referred to as kruvim, shavaliyas nidonis keshroshes, that kaf became part of the shorish. If someone's rog on divrei chazal, ba'agados lo yehesh shimush zeh kal be'enov v'imotzalei, he's going to find arim b'tzurois ve'edim nemanim zulas eila. And then he says v'ulam pirish zeh shel yesh oimrim shehisker. This yesh oimrim, he said, the Tishbi didn't want to tell you who it was, but I'm going to tell you where you can find it. Timotzi b'sefer hazoyer beraya mehemna parshas Pinchas. It's actually a Zohar. Shekain darshu razal shem milas v'shat min the Shat Esav from Vayivas Esav is Habachayra. So Zakir Yaakov Emden that the Yesh Oimrim is really Mefurish and Arai Mehemna, which means you can't just say it's a Tois Gemurah, which is fascinating if you know the relationship between Rabbi Yaakov Emden and the Zayir. But the bottom line is, he's saying it can't be it's a Tois Gemurah, and he's Miyashiv it, and he says Al Yehezer Rachuk Beinecha. In fact, Misha Rogub Divir Azab Agadis Lo Yehesh Shimush Zeh Kal Beinov V'imatze Lo Oirim B'Tzureis Me'edim Namonim Zul Azela. And really, what is the word? You want to know what the word is? The word was really shut. pshat, and it's miloshin bazoi. How did the vav become part of the shirish of the word? Because that's an idea. You find some time l'roiv haregelos, something that really at its core was supposed to be shimushis, ends up becoming shirashis, and that's how you have this inyan. The edition of Sefer HaTishbi that I have has a pirush on the side of it that's called Raglei Mavasa. This pirush, Raglei Mavasa, was written by a 19th century Goyen. His name was Rebbe Eliyahu Hershtik. Must have been Chassidish, because I see he had Askama from the Havas Yisrael division Rebbe, and he had Askama from different Chassidish Rebbes. But Al Kapanim, he wrote a pirush on the Sefer HaTishbi. And on Veshet, he says as follows: HaVeshet nikra b'loshen Ashkenaz Speiser. The hakana, and the kana is called luft, right? The esophagus is the speis, that's where the food goes. And the kana is attached to the lungs, that's the luft, that's where you breathe. And then he says as follows. He says that, I was asked the shaila by a yid whose name was Rabbi Yamin Ullman. Now this Rabbi Yamin Ullman was the son of the Baal Yiriyah Shloima, who was a very famous Goyen in the mid-19th century. He was the Rav of Makava. This truv is between him and the Chassam Sofer, specifically on the topic of Rameir Balanes. Is a famous truv from the Chassam Sofer. The person he's talking to, Kupas Rameir Balanes, is the Baal Yiriyah Shloima. It's the Av Bezdin of Makava. But either way, so this Yid, the Raglam of Asa, said that I was asked a question from Rabbi Yamin Ullman. He said that when he was younger, he was learning in Prishbarg. And he said he had a Rebbe, his name was Rab Nuta Wolf. The Gadol mi Rabban Shmoi says, you have no idea how big my Rebbe was. He was a baki b'shas u'poiskim. And he says, one time he came over to me. And he said, he came over to me and he asked me, he said, why is it that we refer to the kana and the veshet as simonim? It was a simon. What does a simon have to do with anything? He says, I tried so hard to find the reason. Why? What's it to do with simon? What's it to do with simon? I was yogati v'loy matzasni. I couldn't come up with any reason. So he said that he reached out to me. This is the Raglam of Asa talking. So Rabbi Yamin Ullman sends me a letter, and he tells me, my Rebbe, Rab Nuta Wolf, he asked me, do I have any pshat of why the kana and the veshet are called simonim? Maybe you can help me out. I'd love to go back to my Rebbe and tell him. He says, do you have episode pshat? So this year, Rabbi Eliezer Hershtik, he tells him, this is what I told him back. He says, you find that the Indian of Shchita is there's a reason that's brought down that the reason we do shchita by the kana and the veshet is because that's where the dama nefesh is, and you want the dama nefesh to come out. In fact, a person or an animal is not considered dead until the dama nefesh comes out. So he says it comes out that if you see a corpse and you want to know if it's alive or dead, if you see that the kana and the veshet are severed, that means that the dama nefesh left the body. It's a simon that he's dead. And if not, it's a simon that he's alive. So it serves as a simon on the chiyas of the person, whether or not the person is alive or whether or not he's not alive. Then he writes, I don't know who he's referring to, but the Baal Raglam of Asim says he asked his Rebbe, and his Rebbe told him a different shot. He told him because the halacha is that if you shecht the kana and the veshet, even if the animal is still alive, it's mefarcheses, right? At that point, the halacha is that the shchita is going to be considered a shchita. So the severing of the kana and the veshet is a sign. It's a sign that there was a shchita and that it's kosher. And that's why it's called a semen. Hamura mehanal. The Olam was mutching. Rabbi Yamin Ullman, the son of the Baal Yiriyah Shloima, Rabbi Eliezer Hershtik, Rabbi Nuta Wolf, the Baal Raglam of As, Rabbi Eliezer Hershtik, his Rebbe. Nobody can figure out why is it called Simon. He said even this Yid, Rabbi Nuta Wolf, who seems like he was a baki b'chol chedrei toy, cannot figure out what is the simon. What's the simon have to do with anything? You have to. It's two varim, right? That's what it is. It's not simonim. What's pashup shat? So I don't know, but it seems like everyone's trying to say episa vart, episa hergers. So maybe lule the mistafino we can say. We mentioned on Daf Beis. We spoke a little bit about the Machlokes Rishonim. We actually mentioned this yesterday again. And that is whether or not Shchitas Chulin is a mitzvah, Shchitas Chulin is not a mitzvah. There's some Rishonim, Uberoshim, the Rambam, and the Chinuch who hold that Shchitas Chulin is a mitzvah. There are other Rishonim, Uberoshim, the Ravid, and the Ramban, that hold that Shchitas Chulin is not a mitzvah. And the kasha is, if you hold that Shchitas Chulin is not a mitzvah, so then what's Pasha Pshat? Why is it then that you make a bracha, Asheket Ishanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu ala shchita? If it's a mitzvah, it's a bracha mitzvahs. But if it's not a mitzvah, then why are you going ahead and you're making a bracha? And we said that the Ramban is Pirush al Torah. We spoke so much about this yesterday. Says it's related to Tzar Bal Chaim Dairaisa and L'Shomi Azov Shalmar Nachsam Sofer and Erchaim Simen Undal. The very very end of the tshuva where he said it's Keilu Noimar Sheket Yishana b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu l'rachim al abrius. But we said. And then this is the Iker Vart that we said is really a Mefurish Taz in Siman Aleph Yeridea. But we said based on the Rosh, who says in the Sugya of Birchas Erusin and Birchas Chasanim in the first parak of Masechtas Ksubas, that with regards to the bracha that's made under the chuppah, Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu, and what's the bracha that we make? V'tzivanu ala arayos, v'asalanu as arusais, v'hitalanu as anesuais, lanu ayidei chuppah v'kedushin, baruch atah Hashem v'kadosh am Yisrael, ayidei chuppah v'kedushin. But as relates to that bracha, said the Rosh, even though you've asked the man on the street, he'll probably tell you it's a brachas mitzvahs, but lo'olam it's not a brachas mitzvahs, it's a brachas Hashem. The Rosh asks all his famous kashas, and the Rosh says, you want to know what the bracha is? U'bracha zu niskin alosei shevach la'kadosh baruch hu, asheket ishanu b'mitzvoisav, v'hivdilanu min ha'amim, v'tzivanu l'kadosh isha muteres that if a person goes ahead and a person is mekadosh al yidei chuppah v'kedushin, he's showing the kedusha of Klal Yisrael. But at the same time, it's being done with an incredible tznius, and that shows the havdalah between Klal Yisrael and between the Amim, and that's why we make a bracha, not a brachas hamitzvahs, but it's a bracha sheket ishanu b'mitzvaysa v'hivdilanu min ha'amim. That's what the bracha is. So we shtel to, and again, emes, it's really a taz, but this is the beer in the taz, and that is that the pasuk says in the parashas Kedushin, v'hivdaltem ben ha'behema ha'tahir latmeya ubein ha'oif ha'tamei latahar v'lo yiseshaktu es nafshay seichem ba'behema u'ba'oif u'b'chayla she'tirmai so adama she'vdalti lechem l'tamei. The pasuk says you have to be mavdul between the behema ha'tahira and the behema tmeya. Rashi says, what does it mean be mavdul between the behema ha'tahira and the behema tmeya? Ein tzarich loyme bein parah lechamar sharei muvdalim v'nikarim heim. Ella bein Torah l'chol etmeilach, bein shenishchat rubai shel simin lenishchat chetziai, v'kama bein rubai lechetziai meloi saira. And the Torah says you have a chiyuv to be mavdal bein a behema Torah and a behema tmeya. Ubein ha'oif ha'tamei l'Torah. And what does that mean? Zok the Heilige Rashi. It means you have to do shchita, you have to learn chulin. The next pasuk, if you're going to do that, V'yisem li kedoshim, ki kadosh ani Hashem, v'avdal eschem min ha'amim li oisli. If you're going to be mavdal between the behema, hatmeya, and the Torah, and the oif ha'tamei v'ator, v'avdal eschem min ha'amim li oisli. Zok Rashi, im atem uvdalim mehem, harei atem shali. V'im lav, and Rashi says something very mysterious, atem shal nevuchadnezzar v'chavera. Not sure what that means, but we don't have anything to do with that. So the bottom line is, Zok Rashi, you know what the pasuk is saying? That if you're mavdal ben a behema latmeya ubein ha'oif Tomei l'tar, then va'avdal eschem and ha'amim li oisli, ve'yisam li kedoshim ki kodesh ani. The Rosh was mechadish that you make a birchas hashevach when you see the havdalah bein Yisrael ha'amim. You see it under the chuppah, mekadesh am Yisrael ha'idei chuppah v'kedushin. You know where else you see it? You see it by machalas asuras. When a yid goes and he's shecht, and he knows to be mavdal bein nishchat rubai shal simen echel and nishchat chetzioi, v'kama bein rubai l'chetzioi. When he goes through the sugyas that we're learning, he does a lamaisa again. It's screaming va'avdal eschem and this is the Havdalah ben Yisrael la'amim. And if that's Havdalah Yisrael la'amim, that fathers a bracha. You know a bracha? Not a brachas mitzvahs. Lodas. Harayvet varamban. It's a birchas hashevach. It's the birchas hashevach of the Rosh. It's the birchas hashevach asher kedishanu b'mitzvoisav v'hivdilanu min ha'amim. We said the Chassam Sofer said it's keilu noimar asher kedishanu b'mitzvoisav v'tzivanu l'rachim al abriyos. Lulei de mistafino. It's keilu noimar asher kedishanu b'mitzvoisav. But here's the point: the inyan of machalis asuros and the inyan of bein nishchat rubai shel simel and nishchat chetzioi v'kama bein rubai lechetzi meloi asayri. This inyan is something that shows the havdalah bein Yisrael la'amim. Not all mitzvahs were created equally. Different mitzvahs have a different matara. Different mitzvahs have a different person, a different purpose. Some mitzvahs are, we're just showing we're doing the Ratzon Hashem. Take a mitzvah like Mila. Mila is an ois bris kodesh. It's an ois. It's a siman. It's a sign that we're Jews. It's a siman that we're different. The inyan of Mila is to have an insignia in the guf of the person as ich bin an anderer Mensch. The parsha of Machalas Asur is not just a parsha in the Torah, right? People very often will ask. I know I've been asked many times in a secular setting. Explain to me kosher, non-kosher. I just don't understand. It doesn't make any sense, right? What's this all about? That's the real answer. I don't know if you want to say that, but that's the real answer. It's because when a yid keeps kosher, that's a siman that he's a yid. That advises it's an oispris kodesh. And the emes you find that when it comes to machalis asuras, Chazal say there's a timtum alev, v'nitmeisem al tikri v'nitmeisem ele v'nitamtem. And like we spoke after the Mesilas Yesharim in Parak Yud Aleph, and that's the beer in Shittas Rabbeinu Tam that hashta v'hemta tzadikim ena kodesh baruch hu mevit hakol hayon tzikim atzim like kolshkin. It's dafka by Machalas Asuras, and like the Sfar Makdoshim Amazber, it's because when a person eats something he's not supposed to eat, it makes the shinoi in the guf. It's mitamtim the leif. Right, think about this. Bris Mila is Mila Saguf, which is supposed to circumcise really the heart of the person, right? It's supposed to umal Hashem alekachas levavcha. That's what happens when you do bris milah. If a person doesn't do bris milah, he can't properly understand Torah. Right? That's Reb Kivega's famous chiddush, who says that if you don't have a father to do the bris milah, the zayda has to. He says why? Because the zayda has a chiv to teach his grandson Torah, and on bris milah you can't understand Torah because on bris milah bist du verstoppt, and the ois bris kodesh on the guf is a symbol of an ois bris kodesh in the hearts from the yid. And when a person goes and a person is a mohel, so now he has a leiv poiseach, he's able to understand Torah. The parsha Machalas Asuris is mamish operating in that world. That's where it's operating. It's an inyan of Abdul Eschem and Amim Liyosli. It's an oispris kodesh. And you know what happens if you violate that? And he tamtim. You end up with Timtum Alev. You end up not being able to understand Torah. Like the Mesilas Yesharim says, that Ruach Chochmah that comes from the Eibishter, all of a sudden those tzinoiris, they're static, and all of a sudden you don't have the base kibble, and all of a sudden it's not able to penetrate your heart. You're not able to understand Torah, and that's why the tzaddikim get shmira from this inyan, because this is not an Avera B'shoigig. This is something that's undermining the whole Havdalah Ben Yisrael Am and the whole Kedush of Klal Yisrael, the ability to be able to comprehend Torah. But the bottom line is, maybe, again, this is just the hergish, in the world and in the realm of if the inyan of Machalas Asuris is va'avdal eschem min ha'amim liyos li, that means that really, at the end of the day, the parsha Machalas Asuris, the difference between a basar shchuta and a basar nevela is going to make the difference on whether or not you see a yid or whether you see someone that is not able to be masig what a yid is supposed to be able to be masig b'kedushas Yisrael. The kana and the veshet are simonim, because through the kana and the veshet is the asimin as doshtet ayid. Das is a yid ki me Hashem iten chachma mi pivdas usfuna, who's able to be masig. The parsha of shchita is the havdalah ben Yisrael la'am. Hence, the kana and the veshet are signs, they're oisos of the differentiation and that havdalah between Yisrael Amim. And if that's the case, then not just two Eivarim. These are two Eivarim where the siman of the Yid versus Nish the Yid is tali. These are Eivarim shechayi nefesh Yisrael tluyim bahem. And maybe it's for that reason in the world of Drush and Agada we refer to the kana and the veshet as simanim.